Okay, hello everyone. Today we have Dr. Maxine Myre. She's a recent doctoral graduate at from the University of Alberta in health promotion. And currently, Dr. Myre is a post-doctoral fellow at the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Education. So welcome, Dr. Maxine Myre, sorry.
Thanks, Young. It's nice to be
Hi. Yeah, thank you for coming in to talk to us. So, do you want to introduce yourself to our students?
here. Sure. I think, yeah, you kind of covered my current position. So I'm a postdoc in the School of Education at the University of Calgary. Currently still located in Edmonton. Maybe from a more personal side, just generally an active person. I love getting outside. I love plants, if that's not obvious. Yeah, and Young and I know each other from back when she was also doing her PhD at the University of Alberta.
Yeah, so yeah, I can definitely see plants. It's really beautiful. Yeah, so you just finished your PhD, and in the folio document, so article, it says that you started your journey as a researcher by investigating the inflammatory response to fat cells. So it sounds like you started as a, cell biologist. So I want to know how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, I think maybe my journey really shows that where you start doesn't necessarily dictate where you end up. So my undergrad was in biology, and even before I did my work with fat cells, I had a research experience in organic chemistry and in environmental microbiology.
Mm.
So that was kind of the beginning of my training, was more within science. And then my master's was looking at inflammatory responses of fat cells. And during that time, I got involved with Obesity Canada as an organization. And so the cell bio part is just such a small area of obesity research as a whole. And so I
Mm.
started to get exposed to just different topics. And I mean, as a person who loves learning, that was really cool for me to see. And yeah, that's kind of when I started learning more about weight stigma and how, it kind of expanded my ideas of different factors that are involved within weight management, just what determines somebody's weight. And yeah, like I mentioned before, because I'm a fairly active person, I often, you hear messages from, or, comments from people making comments about their weight all the time within the exercise and physical activity context. And so that sort of started rubbing me the wrong way a little bit. And it's like, why are we making these comments? Or like, what do they mean? And what do they show about our underlying assumptions about that relationship between exercise and weight and that sort of thing. So that kind of led me, yeah, to my PhD research. And in that, I examined the relationship between weight stigma and physical activity.
Hmm. And I guess that kind of negative messaging with related to body weight is usually directed to women more than men, right? So I guess your doctoral research was really timely, but also targeting the right population. That's the I guess the center of the topic. So I read your article and I felt really good when it said I get annoyed by this type of comments, and I'm like, oh, that's exactly how I feel. I get so annoyed when people um just say things so easily and so lightly about other people, how other people look in terms, and it could be their body weight, or it could be their, their skin color, or it could be their gender, etc. So, when I read that sentence, I'm like, yes, me too. So, I guess you really have, strong feeling towards, you towards further stigmatizing body weight. And obviously, you're an active person, and you are looking fit, right? So how did you end up in that thinking? Like, do you know why you got so annoyed by those comments that people make?
Yeah, part of it is that there's this assumption that if you're in a larger body, then you're not active and you should
Mm-hmm.
be, and that you should be to lose weight. So it kind of like
Mm-hmm.
builds on that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that's actually not true. There's a lot of people in different body sizes that can be physically active, who enjoy it, who get lots
Mm-hmm.
of different benefits from it that are not necessarily weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
And as I read more and did more research, it really demonstrated that the more focus on weight that there is within like physical activity, the less people tend to enjoy it and stick with it long term, because it's
Mm.
actually very difficult. Like the research is showing more and more that it's difficult to um, lose weight simply by exercising.
Mm-hmm.
Not really how our bodies work. But if that's the main outcome that you're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're setting yourself up, like people are setting themselves up for being disappointed and feeling
Mm-hmm.
like it contributes to their feelings of failure because they're for some reason feeling like they can't achieve this kind of unrealistic goal anyways.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I think again, like sometimes I'd get like thin friends making comments like, "Oh, I'm so fat," or things
Mm-hmm.
related to that. And I think, like, not to say that they were intentionally wanting to harm anybody by those comments, but I think like they really could
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
harm somebody if depending if they're in a different size body, having a different body
Mm-hmm.
shape, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, something you said actually is really interesting. So, so far, I guess in public health, like physical activity promotion messaging was usually around weight control and weight maintenance. Like if you engage in this much activity every day, then you lose this much weight. But that's not really like that oftentimes doesn't get reflected in reality. Like even though I do exercise, I may not lose weight because I eat and I could be under this tremendous amount of stress, so maybe I'll gain weight or something. So I guess that totally makes sense to me, and I'm sure it makes a lot of sense to lots of people. And your research is basically an exhibit of or the proof that really that you know physical activity promotion itself may not be the best way to control weight, or that we shouldn't be focused on weight control only through physical activity promotion. Um, so
In the area
yeah,
in the area of health promotion, like there's a couple of, like, if you want to talk about more things that annoy me.
yeah,
um,
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if anybody's ever noticed that oftentimes weight is treated as a behavior on its own. So you'll
Hmm.
see oftentimes like, oh, if you want to prevent heart disease, you should manage your weight. Well, like, what? Like, what? That's not a behavior. It's like weight's just an outcome or it's a
Hmm.
number, but it's not a behavior. And
Hmm.
so it's really even integrated within like public health messaging, not just within popular media. Um,
Right.
and yeah, so like an area that actually some work with Tanya, my PhD supervisor, we're looking at how people respond to more weight neutral messaging. So if we just kind of take that weight part out and we're promoting
Hmm.
physical activity for um, all sorts of other benefits, what impact does that have on physical activity?
Hmm. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, so your research topic is focused on weight stigma and physical activity promotion, and also I guess your research is at the nexus of public health messaging and physical activity promotion. So for your postdoctoral fellowship, are you doing a similar research as well?
Yeah, I am. Obviously, like a postdoc, typically you would try to gain some either new skills in different research methods or different sort of knowledge areas. Like typically that's what a postdoc would be, part of what a postdoc would be useful for.
Right.
So I'm kind of expanding from just looking at just obesity and looking at eating disorders as well. And then, yeah, so my PhD research was focused mainly on women. And so I'm interested in focusing on the youth population as well, and in the school setting. So if you read any of the weight stigma literature, oftentimes there'll be a section on weight stigma with youth or weight bias, and that's typically seen through bullying and teasing of school-age children, and that starts really young. So I think, like for me, that really demonstrated that we need to start quite early. Like people's ideas of the relationship between weight and health like start really early, and kids, and they already know when they're very young that they have this idea that fat is bad, and that it can really persist unless you're exposed to maybe some other type of thinking about that. I think that can really persist into adulthood and lead to weight stigma at that time as well. So yeah, I'm essentially building on what I did for my PhD and like kind of expanding on that.
Right. Nice. So, linking what you've just said to your previous comments, I guess people usually think there's a really close connection between weight itself and behaviors. So, when we see, overweight individuals, we say, oh, they're lazy, they must be lazy, or they eat lots of junk food and they don't really do exercise. So all those stigma around their body weight really could harm them in a way that people who are just commenting didn't intend to do.
Yeah, exactly. Like those biases and behaviors, like judgments, really like perpetuate the blame and shame. That's like part of weight stigma, is like, this is your responsibility. Like whatever your weight's your responsibility, and you're not doing it, so you're a bad person. There's that kind of contributes. Whereas like if you look into some of the obesity research, like we know that there are so many more factors that play a role in somebody's weight on top of what their behaviors are. So you can't make a judgment on what somebody is doing or not doing only based on weight. Yeah.
That's so interesting, because just one's body weight, like my body weight can link to my morality. Like if I am overweight, I'm a bad person.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right?
Yeah. So I think in epidemiology, your research is very, very important, because we use body mass index all the time, and obesity is a big part of the epidemiological research area. And simply with body mass index, what we do is that, if one's body mass index is between 18 and 25, then they're normal. They have normal weight, therefore they're normal. If someone's 25.1, ooh, they're overweight. So, you need to lose that 0.1 BMI, right? So what do you think about that? I mean, there are increasingly more researchers are, going against that idea, and also, it's reflected in the, movement in our society. There's lots of fat activism, etc. So what do you think about that? But we are still using BMI, right? So what do you think about using BMI, and what could be an issue?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I think like BMI, when it was first sort of created as a measure, was never intended as a indicator of health. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
to be used more from like a population level. Like they needed some kind of easy metric for assessing, yeah, like weight or yeah, I guess weight kind of
Mm-hmm.
on a population level. And so I think like there might still be some merit to doing that, but especially as people who work within epidemiology, it's really important for them to consider how it's not an indicator of health; it's an indicator of a ratio of weight to height.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who fall within, like you said, that normal BMI range, like might have all sorts of other health issues. We don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and um, yeah, it's really not. I guess like we really have to think of it not as a health outcome,
Mm-hmm.
and um, maybe think a little bit more about like there might be another measure that might be more useful, like
Mm-hmm.
like even something like self-perceived uh, like weight or body size categorization like might be more informative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and also like BMI could be BMI could be different in terms with childhood development. So, in really younger age groups, so early years age group between 0 and 5, BMI doesn't really give us anything because their growth is so different and the ratio will be different, right? And also among youth as well, like BMI, yes, we can look at the percentiles and see, the top 5%, maybe they're overweight and the bottom 5%, they're underweight. But I don't think that gives us any accurate sense of their health status. So I guess,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, youth, the
Mm-hmm.
population, yeah, there's limitations, and I would say like also ethnicity has, different
Mm,
cities, like there are different BMI cutoffs, but we have to remember that the cutoffs are like it's like a human that determine what we say is the cutoff, and they're pretty like hard lines. Where, like you said, if you're zero point 0.1 over, then you're considered in an overweight category. But
mm-hmm.
where did these cutoffs come from?
Yeah,
So that is something else that we can ask ourselves.
yeah. Yeah, so if you were to advise epidemiologists who are in obesity research, what would you recommend in their future work? Should we just throw BMI completely away? Well, you mentioned that it's a surrogate measure, so we have to make sure to deliver that message to the readers. But and we could have some kind of alternative measures instead of BMI, maybe more accurate measures for that better reflect one's health. But what do you think for in our future obesity research? What do you think? What kind of considerations do you think we need to make?
Yeah, that's a really tough question.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
um, that kind of to me demonstrates the need for more of a critical, like using a more critical lens to epidemiology, and so maybe
Mm-hmm.
being informed by some other research that is in more critical health studies, or like a critical public health perspective, or if we take a gender lens or a social determinants of health lens, like adding that and thinking about obesity, like yeah, we talked a bit about the BMI side, but oftentimes I think like just diet and physical activity are the only, or like two of the only things that are considered to contribute
Mm-hmm.
to BMI. So I think like thinking about what else has an impact on somebody's weight, like sometimes environment is considered, like the maybe students are familiar with the concept of an obesogenic environment.
Yeah.
But I know I'm just thinking of this one. It's like a map that shows all the different areas that are considered in obesity research to contribute to weight, and it's just like complete chaos because there's so many things that can be playing a role. Like, so yeah, really, I guess like thinking critically about what you're measuring and why, and how does this tie into some of the maybe taken for granted. It's not like there's some relationships that are really just taken for granted that this is a relationship, or it's like a dominant idea in the field. So yeah, I'd really challenge people in the epidemiology field to think about why, like, where is this coming from, and is this the way we want to go forward? Like, might there be some unintended consequences of only looking at certain things?
Yeah, unintended consequences to the population that they're researching.
Well, and that's the thing, is that like I can't imagine anybody who's doing work in a health promotion field purposefully wanting to harm anybody's health. Like I understand that's definitely not the intention, but there could be some unintended consequences associated with just continuing to connect health and weight really, really tightly.
Right. So I guess critical thinking is a really important skill to build for future epidemiologists and also current epidemiologists who's doing research around this topic. So thanks for that advice. I think it's really helpful and amazing. I want to talk a little bit more about your research. So there's a research paper that you provided, and it's basically and it's a good example of your doctoral thesis. So do you want to give us an overview of what the study was about and the main findings of your research?
Yeah, so I think, the one we're thinking about is one of the qualitative studies that I conducted that was related to the impact of weight stigma on physical activity among women with obesity specifically. And I think an interesting aspect is that the participants who were recruited for that study had also participated in like a quantitative experimental study. So I actually had some measures from the previous study about internalized weight bias and weight stigma. So to me, it was really interesting to kind of contrast that quantitative number with some of the qualitative findings that I had in the one study. So I've kind of made my way more into a qualitative, using mostly qualitative methods. And I think they really like lend themselves well to providing a different form of evidence for some of these relationships. Like, so like just to give an example, the weight bias internalization, the average was 5 on a scale of 1 to 7. So, what does that mean?
Right.
I think the qualitative findings of the study really kind of maybe contextualize that a little bit more.
Oh, I see.
Like, participants can now explain like some concrete, stories or examples in their life and what kind of impacts that had on them and their physical activity behaviors. So I really liked that aspect.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of different types of experiences of weight stigma in the physical activity context specifically. And we talked about a couple of them already. So like those really weight-centric physical activity messaging, like you need to earn your, I don't know, cookie or whatever, right? Like you need to burn this much so that you can earn your cookie. That's like probably a pretty familiar type of message for a lot of people.
Yeah.
A really big lack of exercise clothing in different sizes. So that's something, as somebody who experiences more size privilege, like I never really considered that. So that was really informative. And a lot of examples actually of teasing, feeling looked at, people making comments, like either other exercisers or even, instructors or coaches, people like that. Yeah, so a lot of different experiences of weight stigma, and that had a lot of different impacts on the women. So it really made physical activity focused on changing their bodies. So it made people want to engage in physical activity so that they could lose weight. It also made it more of a lose, like some participants described it as like, I'm screwed no matter what, which was interesting. So it was like, okay, well, if I'm not exercising, I'm constantly getting told I should exercise because I need to exercise to lose weight. And on the other hand, when they were exercising, then they were experiencing all these different like weight stigmatizing experiences.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter what I do, it still sucks no matter what. That was like really hard to hear and really unfortunate, and I think shows how important it is to incorporate more size inclusion in physical activity. There was also an aspect that maybe I wasn't expecting, but was also really useful, was the idea of resistance to weight stigma. So I think, yeah, like you mentioned earlier, the like fat acceptance or size acceptance messaging or advocacy in that area is, it's hard to say if it's becoming more prevalent or not. I think my sense that I got from participants and my own experience as well is that if you look for it, you'll find it, and then you'll keep finding more. And so, yeah, if you find a couple, people on Instagram or something like that share those kinds of messages, then you'll keep finding more that have that perspective. So some people had like really resisted, like, no, I am an active person, I do all these things, like it doesn't matter what my weight is. And that had quite a positive, it seemed like it had quite a positive impact on their well-being and their relationship with physical activity. So if we're looking to promote physical activity, then I think that's like a really like important thing to know. Like, yeah.
So I guess there's lots of positive movement going on, but you have to actively seek for that information because it's not yet a dominant idea that, we appreciate all different body sizes and we celebrate it. And the dominant public health discourse is that if you have higher body weight, then that's not good for your health. And if you have, higher BMI, and if you have large body size, then you need to lose that weight, or you need to, get slimmer, basically.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So I think lots of interesting things that came up in your talk. But one thing that I there are a couple things. The first thing is that your study had both qualitative research and quantitative research, and it sounds like they were really complementary to each other. Your quant portion was just giving you numbers that could be easily understood to people. So initially, when I listened to what you said, the research finding that on average you got 5 from your sample on a range between 0 and 7. So that means that also the internalized weight bias is higher. Is that correct?
Yeah. Like I went through the scale and my score would have been like probably 0 or 1. So it was interesting. It was quite a bit higher than I also measured like experiences of weight stigma, which were lower. So so even if somebody doesn't necessarily have like very explicit weight stigmatizing experiences, they might still like endorse and apply to themselves some of these societal stereotypes, assumptions about body weight, and it really has a negative impact on self-worth.
So I guess, and related to resistance to weight stigma, so I guess being empowered is also really important as well. And so that quantitative evidence, it only provides you with not what that numbers indicate. It's, then it means that, it's higher than the average in this sample specifically. But your qualitative evidence is nicely providing the context of the quantitative evidence, like you said. So it looks like you had really good data, combined with qualitative and quantitative.
Yeah, they really like, I don't want to hit one against the other because that's really not, I think in research world, we're pulling from all sorts of different sources of evidence. And even if I don't, specifically do epidemiology research, I'm going to definitely be informed by epidemiological studies. And with epidemiology, or even just like more general like experimental studies, you get those large samples. Maybe your sample is more representative. You look at like relationships and trends over time with different variables. So there's so much that research can tell us as well. And I really enjoy pairing that with the qualitative side. And I think it gives maybe like a whole picture to what's going on. And some of the aspects that came out from the qualitative work, they weren't things that I measured. And so maybe in the future I would measure some of those things. And I guess on the note of quantitative data, epidemiological data, it's really, this is maybe like off topic just a little bit, but I was having a conversation with a colleague who does research with Indigenous communities and who are traditionally, very good at storytelling, and maybe, so they're like crushing the qualitative side of things. And what she was telling me was how important it was for researchers to help with the quantitative data, because that was what policymakers and government needed to be able to say like, yeah, we're going to allocate these resources towards these communities. So, as informative as qualitative work is, like you need both. Yeah, you
right.
need. And so that was really interesting to hear.
Yeah, and it's a really good summary. Like you said, your work is informed by some of the epidemiological findings, but my work is informed by the work that you do in the future, right? So I think that's a really good point. And the second topic that I want to discuss a little bit is that it looks like weight stigma is largely gendered, and we touched on this briefly in our earlier conversation. Why do you think that's the case? Why women are more likely to experience weight bias or weight stigma or even internalized weight bias?
Yeah, I guess like just like as a first point, both genders definitely experience weight stigma. They might sort of navigate that in different ways. And women tend to have quite narrow like beauty and size ideals. So, and even in some, I thought it was really interesting in some research that was specifically looking at weight stigma experiences of men. Even they said, oh, it's worse for girls and women. So that was kind of interesting. And I think like it does come back to those gendered beauty ideals. And the way that maybe women cope with weight stigma. I think like from a societal perspective, like the range that's acceptable for body size for women is a lot more narrow. And maybe the behaviors, like it's I think there are some places where like if you have a larger bodied male, there are a lot of places within physical activity that's seen as an advantage, or not necessarily a disadvantage. I don't know. That might not be the case for women.
Right. So not only the socially accepted beauty ideal, but also how women and men cope with difficulties with their weight. It's quite different. That's interesting because even in children, coping skills are gendered too. Like girls tend to internalize problems, whereas boys tend to externalize problems. So that's very interesting. And I guess that's something that future researchers can really think about in terms of developing different strategies for different genders.
Yeah, and I just thought of another thing was a lot of the, I guess I'm thinking more from a like a not public health messaging, but more like popular messaging. Often weight loss ads and things like that are targeted towards women, so they be like more bombarded with this idea that they need to lose weight and do something about it, whereas you know, like women may more frequently be on diets and things like that, and that's like super normal. Like it's not really like nobody would blink an eye if somebody said, like a woman said, oh, I'm on a diet, I'm just eating salad.
Right.
Whereas like I'm not super familiar with the literature in the eating area, but there's some like foods that are just seen as more feminine or more masculine, which is kind of interesting. Like
yeah, so
very like gender stereotypical.
yeah, and there's masculinity and femininity associated with the issue too. So I guess it's very complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Yeah, so thanks for coming in to talk. Is there anything that you want to add in terms of your research or the things that you do or the conversation that we had?
I guess more like just like a final thought for first-year students, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just recommend, I guess, that people think or reflect on their own assumptions, but more with curiosity, not judgment, right? Like,
which is really hard thing to do.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and so to be like, oh, this is interesting that I think in this way, not like, oh my God, I can't believe like I'm a terrible person, because like these are things that we learn over the course of our lives, but only by reflecting on it can we start to, and becoming aware of it, can we start to maybe shift our thinking in certain ways. Yeah, like it's a long process of unlearning in some cases, and I've found doing that, reflecting, and also just like reading all sorts of different things, listening to people's experiences, like all those things have been really helpful for me to try to gain just a different understanding of other people's experiences, which are quite different from my own.
That's really good advice. So always challenge my own thoughts and my own bias, and always make sure that I think critically before I make the final judgment about things and about people. And actually, the assignment after this talk would be getting certificate of CIHR sex and gender-based analysis modules. So I think it aligns really well with the assignment, the talk that we had. So I really appreciate you coming in and talking to us, and good luck with your postdoc.
Thanks. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Eun.